Hey guys, welcome to another top list on Tuesday. I'm covering top bands, rock bands. I discussed it in my show yesterday. I just kind of feel that rock music as a whole has just kind of become a lost art, so I kind of want to pay tribute to some of the great bands over the last several decades. I got my personal top 20 in no particular order. These are the top 20 bands that I grew up listening to and loved. At the end, I'll give a little shout out, honorable mentions to the bands that I didn't so much care for. So here we go. Let's start off with Poison. In a decade fueled by party anthems and women, Poison enjoyed a great amount of popularity, with only Bon Jovi and Def Leppard outselling them. While the group had a long list of hits, they soon became just as renowned for their stage show, and continued to be a major attraction long after the 80s came to a close. The Red Hot Chili Peppers. Few rock groups of the 80s and 90s broke down as many musical barriers and were as original as the Red Hot Chili Peppers, creating an intoxicating new musical style by combining funk and pop rock together. The Chili Peppers spawned a mass of imitators in their wake, but still managed to be the leaders of the pack by the dawn of the 21st century. REM. They marked the point when post-punk turned into alternative rock. When their first single, Radio Free Europe, was released in 1981, it sparked a back to the garage movement in the American underground scene. While there were a number of hardcore and punk bands in the US during the early 80s, REM brought guitar pop back into the underground scene. Motley Crue. They were undeniably one of the most popular rock band acts in the 80s, combining their theatrics and glam of Kiss with the hard power pop hooks of Cheap Trick. The Crue out-partied, out-rock, and outsold most of their competition. The band even managed to hit the pop chart with consistency with hits like Dr. Feelgood and Without You. Matchbox 20. Upon the release of their debut album, Yourself or Someone Like You, in the fall of 1996, Matchbox 20 was pigeonholed as one of the best post-grunge guitar bands that roamed the American pop scene in the middle of that decade. As their first single, Push, climbed the charts, it was assumed that the band would be a one-hit wonder, but Yourself or Someone Like You continued to spin off singles well into 1998. Limp Bizkit. Formed in 1994, they became popular playing in the Jacksonville, Florida underground music scene in the late 90s. They signed with Flip Records, a subsidiary of Interscope, which released their debut album, $3 Bill Y'all. The band achieved mainstream success with their second and third studio albums release, although their success was scarred by a series of controversies surrounding their performances at Woodstock 99 and at the 2001 Big Day Out Festival. Green Day. Out of all the post-Nirvana alternative bands to break into the pop music mainstream, Green Day was second only to Pearl Jam in terms of influence. At their core, Green Day was simply punk revivalists who recharged the energy of speedy, catchy, three-chord punk pop songs. Though their music wasn't particularly innovative, they brought the sound of the late 70s punk to a new, younger generation with Dookie, their 1994 major label debut. The Beatles. So much has been said and written about the Beatles, but in short, they were the greatest and most influential act of rock era, and introduced more innovations into popular music than any other rock band of the 20th century. They are among the few artists of any discipline that were simultaneously the best at what they did and most popular at what they did. Nirvana. Prior to Nirvana, alternative music was tossed into a specialty section in most music stores, and major labels considered it to be, at the very most, a tax write-off. After the band's second album, 1991's Nevermind, nothing was ever quite the same, for better or for worse. Nirvana popularized punk, post-punk, and indie rock, unintentionally bringing them into America's mainstream like no other band to date. Chicago. According to Billboard chart statistics, Chicago is only second to the Beach Boys as the most successful American rock band of all time, in terms of both albums and singles. And they did pretty good during those Karate Kid movies as well. Journey. Formed in San Francisco back in 1973, composed of former members of two other bands, the band has gone through several phases. Its strongest commercial success occurred between 1978 through 1987. During that period, the band released a series of hit songs including Don't Stop Believin', which in 2009 became the top-selling track in iTunes history amongst songs not released in the 21st century. The Eagles. With 5 number one singles, 14 top 40 hits, and 4 number one albums, the Eagles were among the most successful recording artists in the 70s. At the end of the 20th century, 2 of those albums, their greatest hits and Hotel California, ranks among the top 10 selling best albums ever. The Eagles. With 5 number one singles, 14 top 40 hits, and 4 number one albums, the Eagles were among the most successful recording artists in the 70s. At the end of the 20th century, 2 of those albums, their greatest hits and Hotel California, ranks among the top 10 selling best albums ever. Guns N' Roses. At a time when music was dominated by dance music and pop metal, Guns N' Roses brought raw, ugly rock and roll crashing back into the charts. They were not nice boys. Nice boys don't play rock and roll. They were ugly, raw, violent, and they were also funny, vulnerable, and occasionally sensitive, as their breakthrough hit, Sweet Child of Mine, proved this right. Aerosmith, sometimes referred to as the Bad Boys from Boston and America's greatest rock and roll band, they're one of the most popular hard rock bands of the 70s. They set the style and sound of hard rock and heavy metal for the next 2 decades with their raunchy and bluesy swagger. Nickelback. The band went through a few drummer changes between 1995 and 2005. Nickelback is one of the most commercially successful Canadian groups ever, having sold more than 50 million albums worldwide and ranking as the 11th best-selling music act and the 2nd best-selling foreign act in the US of the 2000s, behind the Beatles. Billboard ranks them the most successful rock group of the last decade. Three Doors Down. Hailing from a small town in Mississippi, Three Doors Down hit their peak in the early 2000s with a string of post-grunge singles, most notably Kryptonite, When I'm Gone, and Here Without You. Kryptonite, with its minor key shuffle and a reference to Superman, was the catalyst for the band's career, generating an unprecedented buzz all across the world that landed them as one of the best bands in the 2000s. Creed. During the late 90s, Creed emerged from a sea of post-grunge contenders to become one of the decade's biggest-selling rock bands. At a time when many other Seattle disciples were lapsing into inactivity or experimenting with less commercial sounds, Creed carried the torch straight forward, grungy hard rock without any apology. And they were amply rewarded, selling millions upon millions of albums in just a few years. Def Leppard. In many ways, Def Leppard was the definitive hard rock band of the 80s. There were many bands that rocked harder and were a lot more dangerous than them, but few others captured the spirit of the times quite as well as them. By toning down their heavy riffs and emphasizing on melody, Def Leppard was poised for a crossover when they successfully came out with 1983's Pyromania. They skillfully used the up-and-coming popularity of a new network called MTV to their advantage and success. And finishing things off with Bon Jovi. After ushering in the era of pop metal with their 1986 blockbuster, Slippery When Wet, and its hit singles You Give Love a Bad Name, Wanted Dead or Alive, and Living on a Prayer, Bon Jovi wound up transcending the big-haired 80s, withstanding changes in style and sound to become one of the biggest and best American rock bands of their time, selling over 120 million albums worldwide and sustaining their popularity well into the new millennium. As the times have changed, so has the band's sound. Bon Jovi is my favorite band of all time, so it's only rightfully so that we wrap this up with them. Well, there you have it, everyone. That's my top 20 top list bands, rock bands that, again, it's a lost art, I feel. I really can't say that in this day and age that music's quite the same as it was before. I can't really even say it's even better. But some honorable mentions I'll give a shout out to real quick that did not make the list. They were either not my favorite or I just didn't have a taste for their music, but still respect everything they did in the industry. Korn, Pearl Jam, Whitesnake, Kiss, Metallica, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Queen, AC/DC, the Rolling Stones, Linkin Park, The Doors, and even U2. All those bands belong on a top list, and they make this list as honorable mentions. Again, in no particular order was this list put together. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you visit my website, briangouldshow.com. Check out the store, and also you can connect with me on all the major social media websites there as well. Thanks for listening in, and I will catch you guys next week.